History isn't a highlight reel of genius. It's a record of decisions made by people, countries, armies, and entire governments that should have never happened. This video isn't about low intelligence. It's about moments where power, ego, confidence, and bad judgment collided and created legendary disasters. 44 real cases from world history. Just proof that stupidity scales incredibly well when it gets authority. 1. Lord Timothy Dexter is the ultimate proof that you do not need a brain if you have maxed out your luck stats. This guy was basically a cartoon character come to life in 18th century America who somehow became a millionaire by making the worst business decisions possible. His haters tried to prank him by telling him to ship bed warmers to the Caribbean, which is like selling heaters to the sun. A normal person says no, but Dexter said brilliant and sent 40,000 of them. In a twist that makes zero sense, the locals used them as molasses ladles, and he made a fortune. Then he shipped coal to Newcastle, the coal capital of the world, basically like selling dirt to a worm. But because of a random strike, he sold it all for huge cash. He is the patron saint of failing upwards. 2. The 1904 Olympic Marathon in St. Louis was less of a sporting event and more of a comedy of errors. The organizer thought it would be scientifically interesting to refuse water to the runners in 90-degree heat just to see what happened. One runner, Fred Lors, got tired after 9 miles, hopped in a car, and rode most of the way to the finish line before jogging the last part to claim the gold medal. Another guy ran in dress shoes and long pants, stopped to eat some rotten apples he found on a tree, and took a nap in the middle of the race. It was the most disorganized athletic event in history, where the winner was dragged across the line and the guy in the car almost got away with it. 3. Imagine being a trained military officer with a machine gun and losing a war to a bird that cannot even fly. That is exactly what happened to Major Meredith in Australia in 1932 during the Great Emu War. The government sent him to control the bird population, but the emus turned out to be tactical geniuses. They split into small guerrilla groups to avoid fire, dodged bullets like action heroes, and simply ran away faster than the army trucks could drive. After wasting thousands of rounds of ammunition and achieving almost nothing, the major had to retreat in shame. The official report basically admitted that if the birds could hold rifles, they would rule the world. It is the only conflict in history where the humans surrendered to giant chickens. 4. There is being gullible, and then there is André Poisson, the scrap metal dealer who actually bought the Eiffel Tower. In 1925, a smooth con artist named Victor Lustig invited him to a secret meeting and claimed the French government was selling the tower because it was too expensive to paint. Any normal person would have asked for some ID or called the police, but Poisson was so desperate to look like a big shot that he wrote a massive check. When he went to claim his prize and realized he had been scammed, he was too embarrassed to even report the crime. He essentially paid a fortune for a landmark he could not take home, proving that a big ego is the most expensive thing you can own. 5. During World War II, the United States military decided that the best way to deliver fire was using bats. A dentist convinced the president that strapping tiny incendiary devices to thousands of bats was a brilliant strategy. They spent millions testing this, but the bats did not follow orders because, well, they are bats. During a demonstration, the armed bats escaped and decided to roost in the newly built army barracks and the general's car garage. They set the entire airbase on fire and burned it to the ground. The army effectively bombed their own headquarters using flying rodents, proving that maybe you should leave the animals out of the explosives department. 6. Thomas Midgley Jr. is the reason we cannot have nice things, specifically an ozone layer or clean air. This American chemist had a special talent for inventing things that sound cool, but actually ruin everything, like leaded gasoline and CFCs. He is basically the king of unintentional disasters. But the cherry on top of this cake of bad ideas was his final invention. After he got sick and could not move well, he built a crazy complex system of ropes and pulleys to lift himself out of bed because he thought he was an engineering genius. Instead of helping, the machine just got him totally tangled up like a bad slapstick routine. He essentially engineered a trap for himself, proving that sometimes you really should just ask for a nurse instead of trying to MacGyver your way out of everything. 7. The Eiffel Tower has seen some crazy tourists, but Franz Reichelt takes the prize for the most confident bad idea in French history. This tailor was 100% sure his heavy coat could turn him into a human glider, despite knowing absolutely nothing about physics. He told everyone he would use a dummy for the test, but then showed up wearing the suit himself like a superhero with no powers. You can actually see him hesitating on the ledge for a long time, probably wondering why he is doing this, but his ego was too big to back down. He jumped, and gravity immediately reminded him that it is not a suggestion. The suit did absolutely nothing except make him look silly as he fell straight down. It is the ultimate lesson in why you should never skip the safety briefing. 8. Talk about not knowing when to let an argument go. Pope Stephen VI was so dramatic that he decided death was not a good enough excuse to miss a court date. He was mad at his predecessor, Pope Formosus, so he actually dug up the old pope, dressed the silent guy in fancy robes, and put him on a throne for a full trial. Just imagine a screaming pope, yelling questions at a guy who is clearly not going to answer because he is not alive. Stephen acted like he was winning a debate against a master of silence. He found the quiet guy guilty, which is not surprising since the defense was pretty terrible. It was the most expensive and ridiculous puppet show in history, and the people of Rome were just confused by the whole drama. 9. Andrew Jackson was known as a tough and aggressive president, but his pet parrot Pole was evidently even tougher and much ruder. When Jackson died in 1845, thousands of people gathered for a solemn, quiet funeral to pay their final respects. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a stream of loud, creative profanity coming from the president's pet bird. The parrot had learned all of Jackson's favorite curse words and decided that the funeral was the perfect time to scream them at the mourners. The bird had to be physically removed from the ceremony, making it the only time a pet has been kicked out of a state funeral for bad language. 10. Peter III of Russia was technically an emperor, but mentally he was a toddler with too much power. One day he found a rat in his room that had chewed on one of his toy soldiers. Most people would just call a janitor, but Peter called a lawyer. He formally arrested the rodent for treason against the crown. I am not joking. He held a full military court-martial for the animal, complete with witnesses and a judge, treating the confused critter like a captured spy. His wife, Catherine the Great, watched this legal circus and realized she was married to a man who needed a timeout, not an army. It is the only time in history a legal team was assembled to prosecute a pest for ruining a toy. 11. King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden is the perfect example of what happens when a boss thinks he knows more than the engineers. In the 17th century, he ordered the construction of the Vasa, a warship that was supposed to be the most terrifying vessel on the ocean. The shipbuilders calculated the weight perfectly, but the king demanded an extra row of heavy cannons at the very top because he wanted it to look cool. The experts knew this made the ship top-heavy and unstable, but nobody wanted to argue with the king. On its maiden voyage, a gentle breeze pushed the ship over, and it sank completely after sailing less than 1 mile. It is the most expensive boat launch in history that failed because of pure vanity. 12. In 1788, the Austrian army managed to achieve the impossible by losing a battle where the enemy did not even show up. During the Battle of Karansebes, the troops were scouting for Ottoman forces, but found a wagon full of schnapps instead. A massive drunken brawl broke out over who got to drink the booze, and someone fired a shot in the confusion. The soldiers started panicking, thinking the Turks had arrived, and began shooting wildly at their own men in the dark. The officers screamed, "Halt!" but the troops misheard it as the Turkish war cry, Allah. By morning, the army had retreated in terror, leaving thousands of casualties behind. The Ottoman army arrived 2 days later and was very confused to find the Austrians had already defeated themselves. 13. General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna takes narcissism to a level that is almost impressive in its absurdity. After losing his leg during a battle, he did not just bury it quietly. Years later, when he became the dictator of Mexico, he decided his lost limb deserved better. He had the shriveled leg dug up, placed in a crystal vase, and held a magnificent state funeral for it. We are talking about a full military parade, cannon salutes, and solemn poetry readings, all for a detached foot. He forced the public to line the streets and salute his old leg as if it were a national hero. It was a display of ego so massive that it is hard to believe it actually happened. 14. German engineering is famous for being precise, but the U-1206 submarine was sunk by a toilet. In 1945, the captain of this advanced vessel decided to use the high-tech bathroom, but was too proud to ask a specialist how to operate the complex flushing mechanism. He turned the wrong valve, which caused high-pressure seawater to flood the compartment and mix with the submarine batteries, creating poisonous gas. The crew had to surface immediately to breathe, right in front of enemy patrols who captured them. It is the only warship in naval history to be defeated by its own plumbing system, and a commander who refused to read the manual. 15. Thomas Austin is the man who accidentally declared war on the entire continent of Australia because he was bored. In 1859, this wealthy settler missed the hobby of hunting back in England, so he imported 24 wild rabbits and released them into the Australian bush. He thought a few bunnies would be harmless fun for a weekend sport. He clearly forgot that rabbits are famous for multiplying faster than you can count. Those 24 rabbits turned into hundreds of millions, destroying crops, ruining farms, and causing an ecological disaster that the country is still fighting today. He ruined an entire ecosystem just because he wanted to shoot at something on a Saturday afternoon. 16. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle created Sherlock Holmes, the smartest detective in literature, but in real life, he was easily tricked by two schoolgirls with scissors. In 1917, the girls took photos of themselves posing with paper cutouts of fairies they traced from a children's book. To anyone with eyes, it looked like bad arts and crafts, but Doyle was convinced it was absolute proof of the supernatural. He wrote a whole book declaring the fairies were real, staking his entire reputation on cardboard drawings held up by hatpins. It is hilarious that the man who taught the world to look for clues ignored every single sign that he was being pranked by kids in their backyard. 17. King Louis XVI of France was arguably the worst escape artist in human history. When he tried to flee the revolution in 1791, instead of being sneaky, he traveled in a giant luxury carriage that moved at a snail's pace. He insisted on stopping for elaborate picnic lunches and wine breaks, treating a life-or-death escape like a relaxing family vacation. At one stop, he was careless enough to pay with a coin that literally had his own face on it. The local postmaster looked at the coin, looked at the king, and arrested him immediately. He lost his freedom just miles from safety because he could not skip lunch for one single day. 18. Christopher Columbus is famous for discovering a continent, but we often forget that he was spectacularly bad at math. He was absolutely convinced that the Earth was shaped like a pear and was much smaller than it actually is. He sailed west thinking he would hit Asia in a few weeks, completely ignoring the fact that a giant ocean and two massive continents were in the way. If the Americas had not been there to catch him, he and his crew would have just sailed into oblivion. He spent his life insisting he had found India, calling the locals Indians, and refusing to admit he was lost. He is the ultimate example of a man who refuses to ask for directions. 19. Joshua Abraham Norton is the patron saint of delusion and the only man to successfully fake being royalty in the United States. In 1859, after losing all his money in a bad rice deal, he did the logical thing and simply declared himself Emperor of the United States. He wore an old beaver hat and a uniform he got from an army surplus store, and he marched around San Francisco inspecting the streets. The funniest part is that the city just went along with it. Police officers saluted him, restaurants gave him free food, and he even printed his own currency, which local shops actually accepted. He proved that if you act important enough and wear a fancy hat, people will eventually just believe you are in charge. 20. Henry Ford was a genius at building cars, but he was absolutely clueless about how the jungle works. In the 1920s, he decided he did not want to pay for imported rubber, so he bought a massive chunk of the Amazon rainforest to build Fordlandia, He tried to force strict American culture on the local Brazilian workers, making them eat oatmeal, banned alcohol, and forced them to do square dancing in the sweltering tropical heat. He also planted the rubber trees way too close together because he thought nature worked like an assembly line, which just helped bugs eat the entire plantation. He spent millions trying to turn the rainforest into a Midwest suburb and ended up with a ghost town and zero rubber. 21. William Miller is the reason you should never sell your house based on a hunch. This American farmer convinced thousands of people that the world was definitely going to end on October 22nd, 1844. His followers, known as Millerites, were so sure he was right that they gave away their possessions, quit their jobs, and climbed onto their roofs or hillsides in white robes to wait for the grand finale. They sat there all day looking at the sky, and when the sun went down and absolutely nothing happened, they had to do the most awkward walk of shame in history. It became known as the Great Disappointment, mostly because everyone realized they had to go back to work the next morning. 22. The architects of the Leaning Tower of Pisa basically failed their way into making a masterpiece. In the 12th century, they decided to build a massive bell tower on ground that was essentially a soft, marshy swamp. By the time they finished the third floor, the thing was already sinking on one side. A smart team would have started over, but these guys decided to just build the remaining floors slightly curved in the other direction to balance it out. They essentially built a banana shape and hoped for the best. It took nearly 200 years to finish a building that looked like it was falling over from day one, proving that sometimes you can be famous just for being incompetent. 23. William Henry Harrison wanted to prove he was a tough military hero, but he ended up proving he needed a wardrobe consultant. During his inauguration as United States President in 1841, the weather was freezing and wet. Harrison refused to wear a coat, hat, or gloves because he thought it made him look weak. To make matters worse, he decided to read the longest speech in history, standing in the freezing rain for nearly 2 hours. The only thing he proved was that hypothermia is real. He caught pneumonia immediately and died just 30 days into his term, serving the shortest presidency ever, simply because he was too stubborn to use an umbrella. 24. Napoleon Bonaparte conquered nearly all of Europe, but he was famously defeated by a horde of fluffy bunnies. In 1807, to celebrate a peace treaty, he ordered a massive rabbit hunt for himself and his top generals. His staff, wanting to impress the boss, bought thousands of tame farm rabbits instead of wild ones. When the cages were opened, instead of running away, the bunnies thought it was dinner time and swarmed the emperor in a giant, fuzzy wave. Napoleon, the man who terrified armies, had to flee to his carriage while being attacked by hundreds of hungry rabbits. It is the only time in military history that a world leader retreated because he was outnumbered by Easter decorations. 25. If you think buying magic beans is dumb, wait until you hear about the Great Comet Panic of 1910. When scientists announced that Earth would pass through the tail of Halley's comet, people lost their minds because they thought the gas would poison everyone. Instead of just closing a window, scam artists started selling anti-comet pills to the public. Thousands of people actually paid good money for sugar pills that promised to protect them from space gas. Others bought special umbrellas and gas masks to wear to bed. It proves that you can sell absolutely anything to people if you tell them the sky is falling, even if the solution is basically a piece of candy. 26. The Army of Liechtenstein holds the world record for the most wholesome military campaign ever conducted. In 1866, during the Austro-Prussian War, they sent a squad of 80 soldiers to guard a mountain pass in Italy. They spent a few weeks hiking, drinking wine, and avoiding any actual fighting because nobody wanted to shoot at them. When the war ended, they marched home, but the head count showed they had 81 men. They had actually made a friend, an Italian liaison officer, who decided to join them because they were having such a nice time. They are the only army in history to go to war and return with negative casualties. 27. For over a century, the smartest mapmakers in the world insisted that California was an island floating next to North America. Despite explorers literally walking there and telling everyone it was connected to the land, cartographers just ignored them because they thought the map looked cooler with an island. Ships would sail there expecting a shortcut and find a solid wall of dirt. But the maps did not change. The King of Spain eventually had to issue a royal decree officially stating that California was not an island, which is probably the only time a government had to legislate geography just to stop people from getting lost. It is a classic case of experts refusing to admit they were wrong, even when hitting a dead end. 28. Clement Valandingham was a lawyer so committed to his job that he literally died to win a case. In 1871, he was defending a man accused of murder and wanted to prove that the victim could have accidentally shot himself while pulling a gun. To demonstrate this theory to his colleagues, Clement picked up a pistol that he thought was empty and reenacted the move. It turns out the gun was very loaded. He shot himself in the stomach and died, but his demonstration was so convincing that the jury acquitted his client. He is the only lawyer in history to win a lawsuit by becoming the victim, which is a level of dedication that probably deserves a raise he never got to enjoy. 29. Tycho Brahe was one of the greatest astronomers who ever lived, but he was ultimately defeated by his own bladder and social anxiety. In 1601, he attended a fancy royal banquet in Prague and drank a massive amount of wine. According to the strict etiquette of the time, leaving the table before the nobleman was considered incredibly rude. Instead of excusing himself like a rational human being, Tycho sat there in agony for hours, holding it in until he caused himself fatal internal damage. He died a few days later from the infection, proving that being polite is nice, but it is not worth dying for. He remains the only genius in history to be killed by good manners. 30. Showing up late to a party is fashionable, but showing up late to the Olympics is just embarrassing. In 1908, the Russian shooting team arrived in London for the Olympic Games ready to win gold, only to find the stadium completely empty. It turns out that Russia was still using the old Julian calendar, while the rest of the world had switched to the Gregorian calendar. They were technically on time according to their own wall clocks, but they were 12 days late according to reality. They missed their events entirely and had to go home, proving that before you travel internationally to shoot guns, you should probably check what year it is in the rest of the world. 31. If you think your neighbors are annoying, be glad you did not live in medieval Italy during the War of the Bucket. In 1325, the city-states of Bologna and Modena hated each other, but the breaking point was literally an old wooden oak bucket. Soldiers from Modena snuck into Bologna and stole a bucket from a city well as a prank. The Bolognese were so insulted that they demanded it back, and when Modena refused, they declared full-scale war. Thousands of men fought and died in a massive battle, and Modena actually won, keeping the bucket as a trophy. To this day, that cheap wooden bucket is displayed in a museum in Modena, a reminder that men will fight over absolutely anything if their ego is involved. 32. The Cold War made governments paranoid, but the CIA took it to a level of absolute comedy with Operation Acoustic Kitty. In the 1960s, intelligence agents spent huge amounts of money trying to turn a regular house cat into a covert spy. They implanted a microphone in its ear and a transmitter in its skull, expecting the cat to sit quietly near Soviet agents on park benches and record their secrets. They apparently forgot that cats are the most uncooperative creatures on the planet. During the first field test, the cat completely ignored its mission, wandered off to chase food, and did exactly what it wanted. The project was canceled because the agents realized you simply cannot force a feline to care about national security. 33. If you think modern investors make bad choices, just look at the Dutch during the tulip mania of the 1630s. Rational adults with businesses and families suddenly decided that tulip bulbs were worth more than gold. People actually sold their houses, land, and life savings just to buy a single flower root that would bloom for a week and then die. At the peak of this madness, one bulb cost the same as a mansion in the best part of Amsterdam. Eventually, everyone woke up and realized they were trading fortunes for simple garden plants, and the economy crashed instantly. It remains the most ridiculous financial bubble ever, fueled entirely by the fear of missing out on a flower. 34. Desperate times call for desperate measures. But the British project Habakkuk was just plain ridiculous. During World War II, Allied scientists seriously proposed building massive aircraft carriers out of ice and wood pulp. They believed this frozen mixture called pycrete would be stronger than steel and could float in the middle of the Atlantic without melting. They spent money and time building a prototype in Canada, convinced they had changed naval warfare forever. Eventually, reality set in when they realized that huge engines generate heat and that the sun exists. The project was scrapped, saving the Navy from the embarrassment of sailing to war on a giant ice cube. 35. Be careful what you wish for, especially if you hire Charles Hatfield to make it rain. In 1916, the city of San Diego was suffering from a drought, so they paid this self-proclaimed rainmaker $10,000 to create a storm using secret chemicals. He succeeded, but he did it way too well. He summoned a storm so massive that it destroyed dams, washed away bridges, and flooded the entire city, causing millions in damages. When he went to collect his paycheck, the city council basically told him to run for his life before the angry locals found him. He is the only man in history to be threatened with a lawsuit for being too good at his job. 36. Neighbors fighting over a fence is normal, but the United States and Great Britain almost started World War III because of a hungry pig. In 1859, an American farmer on San Juan Island shot a British pig that was eating his potatoes. Instead of apologizing or paying for the bacon, the two nations called in the military. It escalated so fast that battle-hardened warships and thousands of troops were aiming cannons at each other over a single farm animal. For weeks, the commanders waited for the order to fire, risking global war over a potato dispute. It went down in history as the Pig War, proving that fragile egos are way more dangerous than gunpowder. 37. Medical school was apparently very easy in the 18th century because top doctors were fooled by Mary Toft and her rabbits. In 1726, this English woman convinced the royal surgeon that she was giving birth to bunnies. Not human babies, but actual animal parts. Instead of realizing this was biologically impossible and a cheap magic trick, the experts wrote serious medical papers about it and brought her to London for study. It turned out she was just hiding the rabbits in her dress. But for a few months, the smartest men in England believed that a woman could be the mother of a petting zoo. It remains the most embarrassing moment in medical history. 38. Pythagoras was a certified math genius who gave us triangles, but he was also terrified of beans. Yes, the vegetable. He led a cult that believed fava beans contained the souls of the dead or were just generally evil. He refused to eat them, touch them, or even look at them. Legend says that when enemies were chasing him, he stopped at the edge of a bean field and refused to run through it because he would rather face a sword than a legume. He was one of the smartest men in ancient Greece, yet he was defeated by a side dish, proving that you can have a high IQ and still be completely irrational. 39. During the conquest of Mexico, the Spanish soldiers ran out of gunpowder, so they decided to go medieval and build a catapult. The problem was that none of them knew how to build one. They constructed a massive wooden machine to launch a heavy rock at the enemy, expecting a glorious victory. They cut the rope, the arms swung up, and the rock went straight into the air, stalled, and came crashing down directly onto the catapult, smashing it to pieces. The enemy watched the whole thing and probably laughed their heads off. It was a real-life Wile E. Coyote moment where the weapon immediately destroyed itself and the builder's dignity. 40. In World War I, the British Army suffered a humiliating defeat not by German soldiers, but by angry nature at the Battle of Tanga. In 1914, thousands of British troops marched through the African bush to attack a German outpost, but they accidentally disturbed massive hives of killer bees. The insects did not care about flags or uniforms. They just swarmed everyone. The well-trained soldiers dropped their rifles and ran away screaming, flailing their arms like cartoon characters. The chaos was so bad that the attack was called off. It is the only battle in modern history that was won by a swarm of bugs defending their honey. 41. In 1869, a prankster named George Hull decided to troll the entire scientific community by burying a 10-foot stone man in New York. When workers dug it up, experts immediately declared it was a petrified ancient giant, proving that giants once walked the earth. People paid huge money to see the Cardiff Giant, and it became a national sensation. The funny part is that P.T. Barnum tried to buy it, and when Hull refused, Barnum just built his own fake giant and said his was the real one. So people were paying to see a fake copy of a fake hoax, proving that the public will believe absolutely anything if it is big enough. 42. Empress Dowager Cixi of China is the reason you should not let politicians manage the budget without supervision. In the late 19th century, China desperately needed a modern navy to defend its coast. Instead of buying warships and cannons, Cixi took the military funds and built a magnificent boat made entirely of solid marble. It sat in a lake at the Summer Palace, completely useless for war because, obviously, stone does not float or shoot. While the actual navy was getting destroyed in battles, she was having tea parties on her 2-story rock. It is the most expensive and heavy lawn ornament in royal history. 43. We have had some bad politicians, but none compare to the horse that almost joined the Senate. Roman Emperor Caligula loved his horse, Incitatus, so much that he lost all grip on reality. He gave the animal a marble stall, an ivory manger, and servants to feed it oats mixed with gold flakes. He even planned to appoint the horse as a consul, the highest elected office in Rome. He forced powerful senators to invite the horse to dinner and treat it with respect. It was the ultimate power move to show the government that a literal farm animal could do their job, and honestly, the horse probably would have voted better than some humans. 44. Diogenes the Cynic was the original internet troll long before the internet existed. When the famous philosopher Plato defined a human being as a featherless biped, expecting applause for his wisdom, Diogenes saw a chance to be annoying. He plucked all the feathers off a chicken, marched into Plato's academy, and threw the naked bird on the floor, shouting, "Behold, a man." He spent his life living in a large ceramic jar on the street, barking at people he did not like, and roasting the most powerful men in Greece. He proved that you do not need money or power to be remembered. You just need a plucked chicken and the audacity to ruin a lecture. Here's the scary part. Every disaster in this video was approved, signed, funded, applauded. So don't dodge the question in the comments. Which decision here proves that power should come with an IQ test? And who would fail it today? Say it. Name it. Let's see how honest this comment section really is. If this video made you uncomfortable, hit like. Subscribe. Because history doesn't repeat itself. It just hires new managers.